All right, I want to share something about how to look at the stories in the Old Testament, and a lot of this I just learned from a guy named Jonathan Pageau and others. But it's helpful because it helps you think about these stories in the New Testament or Old Testament and the New Testament, all of the Bible essentially, in a way that is fundamental, and it's it's almost like the first principles approach. So how I want to illustrate this idea, though, is starting off with a few concrete examples. You can see on the screen I've got a giant circular building, and if any of you know, this is actually the Apple headquarters in Cupertino, California. Uh, it's basically a giant circle, which is sure okay, giant circle, great. Well, here is a small circle. It's a tire or a wheel. So there's our Goodyear wheel. It's also a circle. About the only thing these two have in common is their shape, but that commonality is significant, especially when you think about abstractions. And then I want to show this. This is a picture from Lindell, and it's got a crop circle. This is Rob McPherson's crop circle out west of town, and it's also a circle. And what's interesting is this is very similar to this, and also very similar to this. Although when you think about it, they're only similar in an abstract way. They're nothing alike. You go to work here. Somebody can go to work at the Apple headquarters. You're not going to work in a tire, and one person might go to work once in a while on this crop circle, but in general, these are very different things. But the fundamental elements of them are the same. The shape and the pattern is the same. So why do I talk about this? Well, it's because you can abstract all these three different things and all other circles like it into a pattern that's universal, or a statement that's universal across all circles. And that's essentially what math does. So math is an abstract way to represent a concrete thing. So it's like saying you've got a car and a boat and a skateboard. All of those are like vehicles essentially, and that's the abstraction. And in this case, math adds a layer of a prediction on top of the abstraction in the sense that it allows you to predict with a high degree of accuracy what kind of dimensions you'll be working with. And so in the case of the crop circle, I can immediately just decide, I can just measure this and find out exactly how large the area is, the radius and diameter, just with one dimension, this one radius. So that's the abstraction. And the abstract idea is the area of the circle. Again, I just want to describe this idea of abstraction because it's really critical. There's essentially these three layers. There's this manifestation layer at the bottom, which is the hard manifestations, the material things that actually exist. And then there's this abstraction above it, which is descriptive. It's extremely predictive and descriptive of the material layers that it is abstracting. And then even above that is this higher level idea, the area of a circle, which is almost so abstract to seem useless, but it actually contains all of these. So, reason I bring this up, you can think of the stories in the Bible and all scriptural stories, really, Book of Mormon and others included, and even stories that are representative of these abstractions as fundamental patterns that manifest themselves in real world situations. And So, for example, I want to share. Let's talk about Adam and Eve. So, Adam and Eve. Well, I'm going to back up a little bit. The way in which math abstracts the material world and the real manifestation of things is through symbols that you can count and use as to manipulate to figure out dimensions and measurements of the material part of it. That's not exactly how the spiritual patterns are abstracted. Spiritual patterns are abstracted using stories. Stories represent the fundamental stories of life, which are contained in the Bible and in the scriptures, are essentially abstract stories of an infinite array of real stories that play themselves out throughout life. So I'm going to give an example with Adam and Eve. And basically, you can think of it as, here's this fundamental pattern represented here, and there's a lot to it, and I won't go into all of it. You could spend forever just talking about this one story, but fundamental patterns essentially are exposed to good and evil, the opposites. You're in this garden state, but you're only exposed to one side. You only have this idea of one thing. But once they eat the fruit, they become exposed to two things, and they're opposites, good and evil. And then they realize, wow, there's a lot of evil, and we are vulnerable within this world. So, and then as a consequence of this realization of these opposites, they get kicked out of God's presence. And they have to cover their vulnerabilities with the garments of skin. But in a nutshell, you can think of the story of Adam and Eve as when they ate the knowledge of good and evil, they absorbed knowledge of opposites into their mind. And it's as if what it's the kind of thing that happens when you become exposed to the opposite of a fundamental structure of your belief, a fundamental structure of your reality. And all of a sudden you're exposed to the opposite of that. And you can't handle it. You can't understand it. You can't incorporate it into your life. It breaks you. It causes you to splinter, essentially. And that kicks you out of this state of paradise, essentially, into a state of wilderness. You're in a chaotic sphere because a fundamental part of your reality has now been challenged. That's the story of Adam and Eve. That's what the fundamental nature of the story is. And this happens all the time. I mean, kids are a good example. Kids eventually start to lose their innocence because they become exposed to things that are difficult for them to absorb. And I've got this example. There's two opposites here, the kids that are studying and doing great thing versus the ones that are drinking and doing drugs. When you learn as a kid that there are other kids your age doing drugs and drinking and maybe having sex, that there's this fundamental issue. You've got this dissonance almost. It's like, oh, that's a thing. That's an opposite of what I've understood always. Yeah, so that's how it plays out. And then it's the same thing with, church. So I've got my favorite example is actually when people become exposed to alternative ways to view church history, church doctrine, church leadership, and so forth. In some cases, it fundamentally challenges their point of view, and they were in this garden-like state. They didn't expect to have to wrestle with this opposite, this alternative viewpoint, which in some ways can be very compelling and convincing. And that's the story of Adam and Eve. This is what's so funny about these patterns too, is the thing I think that atheists get probably wrong is the stories within the Bible explain all of life's stories, even their own. It can predict the atheist's story with extreme precision. And this is just one example of it. There's a lot of others, but it's not just the atheists. It's any sinner. By sin, I don't mean a reprobate or a terrible person. I mean someone who's missed the mark, and they've been exposed to an opposite, and they've chosen to pursue that opposite to its end. I think that's effectively what happens when we sin, and that's what all of us do. We are all going to experience these kinds of exposure to opposites, things that we absorb and we try to absorb, but we can't integrate them, and it splinters us. It changes our identity, and it turns us into a multiplicity type situation. So I want to give another example. The story of Cain and Abel. By far one of my favorite stories. Outside of the story of Christ, this might be my favorite story, actually. In the story of Cain and Abel, Abel is the one who sacrifices according to how God would suggest. And Cain is the one who he takes a little different approach. He doesn't do the exact right sacrifice, and he also doesn't respond well when he's given feedback from God that his sacrifice was not right. And it's because of this that it goes well for Abel. His sacrifice is accepted. He's blessed. He's blessed with flocks and herds. In Cain, his sacrifice is not accepted. It blows up in his face, just like this picture shows. And then he gets bitter. He turns angry and ends up slaying Abel. And it's all because he's sacrificing to the wrong God. He's put this idea of earthly things ahead of heavenly things. And because that focus shifted to a lower order thing, it basically is focused on a false God. The true God is the one that's the highest. The true God is the one that truly transcends all existence and can unify it all within one holistic approach to the cosmos and life and existence. False gods can only explain one thing. And even that thing usually turns out to be a lie, or sometimes turns out to be a lie, I should say. But if it's lesser, it always ends in this pattern. So you can sacrifice to God, or you can sacrifice to worldly ideas. Cain's story would suggest it's not a good idea to sacrifice to worldly ideas because they are a lesser God. Abel's scenario would suggest you should sacrifice to the true God because it is the highest scenario. And a perfect example is you can do service on behalf of others, which is a total sacrifice of your time, effort, talents, and so forth for help and serving others. Or you can sacrifice for your own gain, your own wealth. You can put yourself at the center of life and orient all of your attention around that. That's one way. Another way, and this might seem funny because I've got Will Smith here smacking poor Chris Rock for a mildly not funny joke, but also but not that bad. And then on the other side here, you've got the Book of Mormon playbill, which is a complete mockery of Mormonism. And then in there is an ad literally from church describing a take on this that you might want to consider another approach. And it's basically taking the joke. It's being a part of it and not overreacting. Whoops, my lights went off because of my automatic scheduler. The issue is when you can't take a joke, you're putting yourself ahead of God. You're not willing to transcend the situation. You're not willing to ascend above the fray of the joke. And that's what Will Smith did. He essentially ate the joke, completely absorbed it, decided it was an affront to him personally and to his family, and that it was his duty to smack Chris Rock. Well, that's a selfish response, and we all do this. I'm not trying to judge Will. I think we all do a version of what he did. Obviously, hopefully, none of us actually do that, what he did, but to some extent, we do the same thing anyway. But what I'm trying to say is that was a lower order worship or form of attention. His attention was too low. He went too low. He did exactly what Denzel Washington warned him. The devil got to him. So, and it wasn't the devil as in it was like the devil actually spoke to him or anything weird. I'm just saying that he had this lower order priority that he'd put at the top, when the truth is the top priority was to take the joke and move on. So anyway, here's another example, and I love this one. This is all throughout Isaiah. This is the pride cycle. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but Isaiah's pride cycle talks all about the lofty city and the New Jerusalem. So that's what this diagram. This is from the Bible Project, by the way. Those guys are awesome. So plug for them. There's like 5 people that watch these, so plug for them. They're not going to be sending me any commission checks for plugging them, but they are awesome. So for the 5 people that watch this, make sure to send them kudos. And the pride cycle, though, involves this cycle of if we put Christ first in our life, meaning the true God, Christ being the true God, and Heavenly Father, we act in accordance to proper social roles. We submit to those above us. We sacrifice for those below us. And it leads to abundance. It leads to proper social cohesion and unification. It's atonement, essentially. It brings society together into an alignment that is powerful and useful. But that abundance tends to lead us to pride. And when we get prideful, we start thinking, I actually did all of that. I'm the one that led to that abundance. Maybe we should shift the focus to me. Have everybody focus on me. I'm not interested in God anymore. And I'm not trying to help out other people below me anymore, because they're there to serve me. And then these lies start to manifest themselves. And then eventually you get to the point where you hit rock bottom, because your life has been so weighed down by the lies that you have no way out except admitting what's true. And that's what happens. So this words expose the lies, and the wicked are cleansed. And then your slate is wiped clean. It's clean, which is great, but it's also clean in the sense that it's a desert. It's desolate. There's nothing there. You have to start over. And then if you put Christ first, you get this cycle to go into the abundance stage again. I have a wonderful, most inspiring example of this is Terry Crews. And I applaud him incredibly for sharing this very sensitive and vulnerable subject, because he shared the whole thing. And the pride cycle manifests itself completely in this experience. So I'm going to show this, and I'm going to also...
Rebecca and I have been able to manage this family, this career over the last 28 years just by being a team. My wife was trying to get me on the right plan, and there was the ego. I was a card-carrying member of this toxic masculinity, and it all came through with me realizing that I didn't know everything. When we got married,
so I want to stop there. Let's notice one thing. He started with a family. He's got a family. He's got his wife and kids, and then all of a sudden, and that's abundance. Having a wife and kids as an adult man is an abundant life. And then his orientation in life started to shift. Focus started to be more on him, and it's exactly what he said.
Family. She put everything on hold for 20 years. There were times I would have 3 jobs at the same time. And she was like, I've got the kids, I'm taking care of the home. All during the success of the career, I've had an addiction to pornography. it was always hidden and secret and this and that. And I never.
And there it is, the lies. Now it's hidden. It's hidden in secret. It's covered in lies. So he's covered. He's got this false covering with lies.
Never told my wife during our whole marriage. And I finally broke.
When I first confronted Terry, we had it out. He told me about the prostitute. He told me about all the porn things. I said, you know we're done, right? He's like, what? I told you everything. I said.
Now he said, you know we're done, right? And that's the issue. The desert is about to occur. There's about to be a complete desolation in his life.
That's good, but now it's over.
It woke me up. I was like, I need to get better for me.
The hardest.
And now you can see the rock bottom starts. He's had this issue. Rock bottom is hit.
Part was knowing that someone I loved, respected, and trusted was nothing like I thought he was. And now it's like a lie. Everything was a lie. I believe in the heart of every man is this little bit of pride, this little bit of arrogance that says, oh, she won't leave. But when he saw that I meant business, I think it really challenged him. He says that he made the commitment to get better, whether or not he got us back.
Eventually, Rebecca did choose to come back. I had to earn it, and still I'm earning it.
He suddenly became very transparent. It was really not like him in my mind. He put the money where...
He became really transparent. That is a godly response. That's what gave him power. It's the words he spoke. He would speak the truth. And that started to completely reorient his life back towards the true God, which is Christ.
Where his mouth was. And he went to see a counselor. And afterwards, I would say it took me probably 3 years to trust him again. I have little moments now of PTSD. When I look back over my life.
Rebecca Cruz is my backbone. When someone knows you from good all the way to the rottenest, dirtiest part of you and loves you anyway, that's the rarity. That's where you want to be.
And that's true love. That, what she did was had her orientation toward Christ as well. Meaning that she knew she could have just walked away, left him. She could have focused on herself. And yet what she ended up doing was sacrificed for him, in a sense, because she was richer than he was. He was poor when the lies broke. And I'm not talking wealth in terms of money. She was richer than him in terms of status and truth. She had more truth. And she could have just focused on herself and left, but she loved him and therefore sacrificed for him and made it so that he could get back on the right path.
Rebecca, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. My tremendous pleasure.
You guys have been married 28 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you and I were talking earlier. There have been ups and downs,
Yes.
Clearly. And you said that you had a come to Jesus moment in your marriage that almost led to divorce. Describe that moment for us.
Well, my husband was away on location shooting a project, and we got into an argument because he was out late with his cast members, but it turned out he was out late with one cast member. I started to hammer him with questions, and all of a sudden he starts coming out of his skin with these confessions. 10 years ago I did this, 13 years ago I did this, and I have this addiction to pornography, and he starts to tell me all this horrible, horrible stuff. And my immediate reaction was to throw him out, and I did.
Obviously, it brought out a lot of emotions. One of them was anger. I know you said when we were talking to you earlier You said, I thought I'm going to take your money and move on with my life.
Yes.
I'm still young and I've got my groove and I'm going to get a new man and I'm going to keep it moving.
Yes. When I said to him, we're done, right? He's like, what?
Yeah,
What? You're going to leave me?
I did.
You're going to leave me? I said, yes, I'm going to leave your raggedy behind, and I'm going to take your money too.
Yeah.
And I said,
Yeah.
you're going to pay my child support for me and my new man. That's
I got to tell you, man, guys operate off pride.
Tell it, honey.
We do. And you're successful, you feel like that buys you a pass. That it's her. That it's them. It's everyone else. But then a small voice came to me and said, maybe it's me. I did not go to rehab to get my wife back. I went there because I needed to be a better person.
Amazing. So, Terry Crews, wonderful actor, wonderful human being, shared an incredible story. There's a podcast with Tim Ferriss that he describes in more detail. It is extremely inspiring. And the reason it's inspiring is because it's true. His experience is true. And it's so true that it applies to everyone. And the way it applies to everyone is perfectly described in the Bible. It's this pattern. It's this cycle. The cycle of pride is exactly what happens. Pride leads to a fall. The fall is clouded by lies. The word of God restores truth. He didn't talk about a lot in here. He is Christian. It's not even necessarily the fact that he's Christian. It's the fact that he knew that that he lived this pattern, and that Christ is ultimately the truest form of how we can get through this pattern. Because we're all going to go through it several times, unfortunately. But the amazing thing is the redemption side of it is there. We can be redeemed through Christ by focusing our attention on him, taking our attention off of ourselves, letting the true God be our God.